So this is where shit gets complicated. So I took in a transmission job and it's sight unseen. And of course, it was quoted as a swap. Get it here, check codes in it first, tell the customer you got two codes. You got transmission control module code, and then you also have a shift or a forward clutch brake solenoid code. Didn't say bad, but it has a code. The transmission control module code is one I can't right off the top of my head is like D026J or something crazy, and it's a communication error. Basically, it's a loss of PROM memory. So, you know, solder joints, yada, yada, yada. But also, I would think more along the lines of solder joints of the loss of PROM memory, because that's internal to the PCM and it gets its voltage from the power distribution center. It doesn't get its power from the transmission. There is a ribbon in the transmission that connects the valve body to the external connector that connects to the TCM harness. And that ribbon can go bad, and you can get all kinds of fun stuff when those ribbons go bad. The solenoid itself could be bad. I haven't even dropped the pan yet to verify. The reason I haven't dropped the pan yet to verify is because that's going to cost me $70, $60-$70 in fluid to fill it back up if I want to test anything by replacing like just a TCM or putting the TCM in it and do bidirectional communication to actuate the solenoid. I currently don't have that capability. I have just, I've got a scan tool that does have that capability, but it only goes up to 2015. And rather than pay the $700 or $800 it would cost to update my tombstone from 2005, I think I'm just going to go ahead and get the launch. I'm going to go ahead and pick the launch X431. It's a Pad 7 Elite, and that's going to give me J2534 capability for not just bidirectional communication, but also be able to flash and program. So I think it's going to make my money. I want to make my money back on that within the next couple of weeks. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Here's the issue. It's going to cost $350 for the software from Nissan to flash it, or I can clone the old one. Unfortunately, we have a transmission control module PROM failure code, which says that I can't clone that particular module. So good luck there. I'm going to have to get the software. Option two, here's where I was hung up. I was told by somebody that transmission control module is internal. So I start talking to the customer. I haven't told them anything more than you have these codes, not that they potentially could have a solenoid and a controller issue and not a transmission fault, because somebody else already diagnosed this thing to have a bad transmission and may have already done what I'm getting ready to do. So I'm going to back probe that connector and make sure that the solenoid ohms out after disconnecting it from the TCM, which the TCM's MIA. I've already pulled it out, so there's nothing on the other end of it. So an ohm test behind the connector should be fine. I don't need to take the connector out of the male out of the female in order to probe just the pins. I can back probe at the connector, which does make shit a little easier because you can slide a pin in the back of the connector and let it hang there. Okay, so let's find out. We'll say we find out that the ohm test or the ohms resistance test on the solenoid passes. All right, now I'm still waiting for a TCM. I'm waiting for a TCM regardless because the TCM's bad. So I can send it in for repair, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to send it in for repair, and they pre-program it, so I won't have to have the J2534 capable tool to do this job, but I will have it for in the future. So then once that TCM comes back in, I don't just want to willy-nilly go plugging it in to what could possibly be a faulty connector or a faulty solenoid, you know, something that's going to short out and cause our TCM to fail again. So I'll go ahead and get a diagram for that connector and do a pass-through resistance test on the connector to the solenoid and see if we're within spec at the connector for each solenoid. And we only had the one giving us an issue. But of course, then if it passes, and the TCM is in there, I'll go ahead and I'll connect the TCM. We haven't drained the fluid at this point. We're not an internal module, so we don't have to worry about debris and stuff like that by changing parts out, blah, blah, blah. It's already in there. If it's in there, it's in there. I could drain it and see if we got a lot of glitter in there. Okay. I haven't given any of this information to the customer other than they have these codes. I haven't told them that I'm pondering the fact that they might not have a transmission problem or an internal issue with the transmission. Here's why. I already bought a week's worth of time to get this scan tool in here, which means by the time it gets here, I can do the bidirectional test with the scan tool when it gets here. I can also ship out the old TCM and have it repaired and sent back by the time that scan tool gets here. I can have the transmission sitting in the driveway waiting to go in, which unfortunately for them means that if I wait that long and all I got to do is put the axles back in the hubs and get the back wheels off the ground, right? Transmission's not out right now. It's like a bunch of stuff is disconnected. The air box is off of it. The battery's out of it. I mean, I could throw it together enough to test it within 20 minutes. And I've been hesitant to pull the transmission completely out because of that. And some of you are out there yelling at me and saying, hey man, you've already been authorized to put a transmission in it. Just go ahead and fucking do it. But I've already told the customer at this point that one of the things I didn't know getting into this is that it needed a transmission controller. So I had to, one way or another, I had to sell a transmission controller. But at this point, I thought that the controller came with the new unit. So I was telling her, okay, I can typically just program that new unit. So we just need a software. So I sold the software at no extra cost and no markup. And I feel like that's the right thing to do because I didn't look into it good enough to let them know that it was going to need to be programmed. But then at the same time, I didn't know it had a transmission module issue, because if it didn't have a transmission control module issue and it was internal, I could theoretically swap the one that came with the vehicle into the donor transmission and not had to update anything. And that's perfectly fine to do as long as you clean it out really good. So then at that point, I wouldn't need to flash anything, and she would have saved that $350. But then I find out after I call the dealer, right, and give them the VIN and price the actual controller, that they give me a part number, and I still at this point I'm thinking it's internal. I've been told it's internal. I think it's internal. And then I contact a remanufacturer for a pre-programmed reman unit and give them the part number, and they say, man, this one's first of all, told them what I'm working with, and they say, oh, we don't do the internal ones. Like, okay, well then I send them the part number and said, we do that one. That one's external. I'm like, oh shit. So now we're talking, I could replace potentially the TCM and a solenoid and fix this thing maybe. But then of course that means I have to order a solenoid. Customer had to pay for a solenoid. I had to test it and make sure it's bad first, right? But again, I can't do that without my scan tool that does bidirectional communication and will operate the solenoid and do a test on it. And I don't want to do that. I could do it right now with the original TCM, which I'll probably do when the scan tool shows up first, just to see shits and giggles if I can at least operate the solenoid. If I can operate the solenoid, you can hear it clicking, then I'm going to go on with the transmission swap. At that point, if I know the solenoid works, there's no fucking point. And I can actually go in there and back probe at the connector and activate the solenoid with my fuel injector tester, which I'll probably do that. Yeah, I will see if the solenoid doesn't click, or no, and that's their problem. If you can actuate the solenoid without the TCM, it doesn't necessarily mean that the TCM doesn't have the ability. So you got to test the output of the TCM to put it in drive, but it won't do that without line pressure. And you have to start the fucking thing up, back probe, and try to activate it by putting it in drive and see if I got signal coming out of the TCM. So that's what I need to do. which means I need to stick the axles back in the hubs temporarily, stick the rotors, I never took the brakes off, so stick the axles back in the hubs, put the ball joints back in, step on the brake, start the thing up, have my wires in the back probe position all ready to go, multimeter connected, throw it in drive and see what we got. And moving forward, I'm going to test this real quick. And I'm also seeing, you know, on these CVTs, it's not likely to have just a solenoid failure. It's likely that you got other issues going on. And of course, I can drain the fluid, and if there's glitter in the fluid, just be okay with swapping it. So that's also a pretty quick way of determining. And the reason I haven't said anything to my customer, and I want people's opinion on this, I've been authorized to replace the entire transmission. If at the end of this week-long waiting period, or 2-week waiting period that's been thus far almost, or that it will be at the end of it, if I come back and say, would you rather, as the customer, have known every detail of what's going on right fucking now, or find out at the end of this that everything went exactly the way you thought it was going to go? We replaced the transmission and the controller, had it programmed, and you leave with a car that has a 1-year warranty on that transmission. And you spent your entire $4,000. Or you find out in a week and a half that I did go through all this shit and it ended up saving you $2,000. And I'll tell you about it later. If it were me, I would really appreciate B. But at the same time, just because I saved them $2,000 today doesn't mean that transmission is going to hold together for another month. It might not. So I could be fucking them by not putting the unit in with just charging them the $2,000 now. I think that's probably the best course of action. But of course, me, I'm always like, man, I want to save somebody money, or I want to fix the problem. But sometimes trying to band-aid something, putting a lot of extra work into band-aiding a unit like that is just going to be, it's going to bite you in the ass. And is it going to cost more money to do it the right way, or to do the entire unit replacement? Yeah, but also the customer's covered under a warranty after that point, at least for a year to 12,000 miles. And after that, they're back to square one, but they got, you know, at least another year mileage out of it. And to be fair, you can get extended car warranties on the entire car at any point. And then they have Car Shield, which is never a bad idea. But I think that's the conclusion of this video. I'm just kind of ranting about what it's like sometimes to have to make that ethical decision. What's more cost effective for the customer long term might be not what's most cost effective for the customer right now. And you got to consider that. And because band-aiding and chasing band-aids, it's going to get annoying to the customer. They're going to have to keep dropping the car off for more transmission repairs, and that's all they're going to hear in their head. They don't care if it's the module. They don't care if it's a solenoid. They don't care if it's a seal. They're just going to hear transmission. And it was just worked on. That guy just fixed my transmission. Yeah, and now you're married to this motherfucker because you tried to save the customer $2,000. And now it's yours. Anyway, that's a day in the life of a fucking aftermarket mechanic in 2026.